Hello and welcome to this edition of Going Public. I'm your host, Keith Weissach. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. And we're always glad to have with us to get updates for what's happening all around the place with Terrebonne Port Commission. We welcome back to the program David Rabelais. David, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Thanks
for having me.
Absolutely, man. Look, we know there's always a lot going on the port. Tell us a little bit of some of the updates going on at the Terrebonne Port.
Well, we're going to go over the maintenance dredging of the Home and Navigation Canal.
Okay.
We're also going to discuss some of the federal and state work we do on the deepening and the maintenance of the Home and Nav. We're going to talk about the state legislature, and we got a lot to unpack.
I know it. Look, there's always so many different aspects of this. We appreciate you keeping it together to let us know what's happening.
And then the last thing on the state level, I'm the incoming president for the Port Association of Louisiana starting in June.
That's right. Congratulations.
And then I was also recently named chairman of the Louisiana Community Development Authority, which is the LCDA association, and so I'm going to be busy for the next couple of years.
Okay, very good. Well, we're glad to have you in that role.
Thank you.
So how about a little bit more about the dredging? Because I know the maintenance dredging that started, it's a critical issue. What's the maintenance dredging status? Where are we with it?
All right, so this is a long, drawn-out deal. They started last summer before the hurricane, and right after they got out there, they had to demob. They ended up coming back in January. So the original contract was for 500 in the bay was 514,000 cubic yards. The dredging started in January. They started the channel in Terrebonne Bay. I'm sorry, I said January. November 24th they started.
Right.
January they completed the bay work. Okay. And then they rolled into to Cat Island Pass. The Corps had to do a lot of contract modifications, and so they were able to get additional money for the hurricane, $12 million. And we already had $12 million, and I think we're getting $12 million in fiscal year 22, which the budget should have been approved in October.
Okay.
But it hadn't been approved yet, and you keep hearing the continuing resolutions because they keep on moving the debt ceiling up and all that. So now the new date is March. I think it's March 11th is the new debt ceiling. So we have to go through this process every year. It's been taking a lot longer this year. Mm-hmm. The Corps is spending money that they're anticipating getting, and so at some point they running low on funds, and they're going to have to just stop the work until the government sends them the check,
Yeah, so, and it's always that difficult thing where there's the delay in getting those funds. You can project what you think it's going to cost, but you can only spend money that you have.
That's correct. So they juggle money over there a lot,
Right.
So the total bay volume was 1.5 million. It was 500,000, so it doubled. It tripled. It tripled after the storm.
Right.
The total cut in the bay it's 10 miles from mile 1 to mile 11. It's cut to 18 feet deep. So mile 1 is right by the sea buoy.
Okay.
0 is the sea buoy, and it counts north. Okay, so at the end of coastal where it intersects, it's mile 36. Okay, so the bay is from mile 0 to about mile 10. Okay. And it's a 10-mile bay. It's a little bigger than that, but anyway, so they're gonna go. They dredged all the way from mile 1 to mile 11. So right at Cocodrie.
Okay.
And the cut's 18 foot deep.
Right.
The total cost was $11 million, and it was completed. In January. That's the one that was completed in January.
Okay. It just got finished.
That's right. And then they did the contract modifications with the contractor to add Cat Island Pass because that wasn't in the original contract.
Right.
So
but that's pretty big, right?
What's that?
The size of that.
Yeah, it's Cat Island Pass and it's deeper too. That's going into the Gulf. It's transitioning from mile 0, which is a sea buoy,
right,
and then it transitions to the natural 15-foot contour. So you have to dredge until you just get to that natural 15-foot depth, or 20 foot, I think is what they dredge that one 18. They dredge that one 18 to 22 feet because it's an over dredge.
Okay.
And so the volume was 1.275 million cubic yards, and the total length of that cut is 3.6 miles from mile 0 to minus 3.6.
Right, because going the other way.
Which is 22 feet deep. That's correct.
Wow.
So And that's the area we have a lot of problems with, that area, and right at the tail end of the from mile 4 to mile 0, because you have an east-west current that goes, and you have all the material that comes from the east, and it just falls into the channel.
So you're fighting it as it comes in,
yeah,
right?
And we're fighting nature. If anybody wants to get a better description about that, you can go to the Terrebonne Port Commission's website, and on our homepage there's a little picture of a hydraulic dredge. It looks like a jack-up boat. It's animated. You click on it, and it's an animated video, but it lasts 5 minutes. But it's going to tell you everything you need to know about the Houma Navigation Canal and what we deal with every year.
Well, and look, I know to a lot of people that are out there in boats and boating and fishing, they want to see what's happening with that.
That's right. That's
you know,
right.
and how that impacts where they want to go.
When the channel was originally designed and dredged and dug in the 1960s, early 60s, it was completed in 62. The design was flawed because it didn't have a guide jetty following the channel out until it got to the deeper water. And I know in 1937, I don't know how wide the bay was in 1962, but I know in 1937 the bay, because I have a study that they did, the bay was only 2 miles in diameter.
Okay.
And if they had dug the channel then and put jetties on both sides, you may still have some of that marsh and all of that bank still left. Okay, but they didn't do that, and they figured in the study they did in 1937, they said that it was only 2 miles that they had to deal with, and you didn't have an east-west flow, and they would have to maintain that 2 miles in that bay. But now it just happens to be 10 miles or 11 miles, and it's continuing to grow. And unless they do something, they can rebuild the barrier islands all they want. In my opinion, they need to put a jetty going north-south on the west side of Timberlake Island to keep it from falling in the channel, because that's what's happening. It keeps falling in the channel.
Into the channel. Okay.
And I think that right there, if they did a jetty 10 miles from that point all the way to Cocodrie, I think it would stop a lot of the erosion that's happening in that lower section. And I think the eastern lobe of that bay would fill in. Okay, it would silt in, because that's where all the silt can't get past the rocks. Okay, the jetty.
Right.
And
hold all that
and
right
then the
there.
other side would stay deep. Okay, so, but it costs some money, and you know, the money that CPRA gets is strictly for coastal erosion, and they can't use it to assist the industry. So we stuck with no money, and we got to beg the Corps for money every year, and we have to keep putting the round peg in the round hole, because that's all we're doing.
Right, because you can't put the round hole in the square peg.
That's right. So anyway, but so that video on terrebonneport.com, go to that website and click on that video, and it's 5 minutes long, but it'll tell you a lot. It shows you a lot.
I like it. I like it.
So the contract modification that they had to do to get the Cat Island Pass work done was $8.86 million, and like I said, that work began January 24th. So they should be complete by mid-April with no major weather delays.
Okay.
The dredge advanced 1.7 miles through February 21st. So they almost halfway finished.
Okay.
It's 48% of the cut. Estimated completion is mid-April, but they could be done before if there's no major weather delays.
And that always impacts the work that y'all are doing. So we're just never
Look, we're still
really sure.
dredging for 21, and we're in 22 because of the weather.
That is correct. That is correct.
And then to top it off, after that is complete, they're going to start, if there's money left over, which we anticipate there will be, they're going to look for a project going north of Cocodrie and just kind of doing some spot dredging where they have some shallow areas. Normally we don't silt in that area from the intercoastal all the way to Cocodrie, because the sediment doesn't come north-south. The sediment comes east-west, and it's all in the bay. You know?
Ah, okay.
So we have no sediment coming north-south. And anyway, so we got to deal with that pretty regularly. And March 11th now is the new date for the budget. We talked about that earlier. For the federal government, that's the debt ceiling deal. Okay, so they have not, they put a budget out for fiscal year 22, but they haven't passed it in Congress because they're dealing with everything else. Okay?
Right.
And we'll get into that in a little bit. But anyway, so we're waiting on March 11th so that they can hopefully pass the budget.
Okay.
And get the Corps the money. Otherwise, they may have to stop dredging. Who knows? I don't know. So
Right.
they're not showing me how much they have, but they're telling me that it could be critical. So
Right.
we'll just have to see.
I got you. So maybe we can start talking about the Houma Navigational Canal, and we'll probably take a break. But let's start talking about it at least, because I know that what the status is of it and the maintenance dredging, right?
Yeah.
What's going on
well,
there?
now that the maintenance dredging's done, we're going to go ahead and do the deepening.
Okay.
Yeah, and the deepening is through the federal government. We got it authorized in 2020.
Right.
And we're moving forward with components of that right now as we speak, and then
Taking
we'll
those
get into
steps.
that after the break.
Right.
But it's a huge capital outlay project. Its total cost is around $350 million. So it's a lot of work, a lot of money, and hopefully we get it. We got 3 years to start because we can't dredge anything until the Bubba Dove is in place.
In place, right.
Not the Bubba Dove, the lock and
The
floodgate.
lock itself,
Yeah.
right.
Once
Which is
that's
the
in
next
place,
phase of
right?
Bubba
Once
Dove.
that's in place, we can start. But in the meantime, we have a lot of pipelines, we have oyster leases, we have a lot of right of ways for spoil disposal that we have to address.
So a lot of those things we're gonna talk about, and so, but this is a critical issue that affects lots of other things.
Yeah, it's the deepening is equally as critical as the maintenance. We've been, industry's been screaming for the last 10 or 15 years to get a deeper channel. They lose business every day, and it's took a long time. Took 20 years for them to study it,
Right.
And we finally got it authorized to deepen it in 2020 to go from 15 feet to 20 feet.
Right.
All right. So 5 feet deeper. It took us 20 years to get it studied. But anyway.
Right. You'd say it's only 5 feet, but it takes a long time to get
That's
people to agree
correct.
to do it.
That's correct. And so, and like I said, that's a big capital project, and
Right.
it'll cost upwards of $350 million.
Right.
And one of the conditions that we agreed to, or we had to agree to, was that we can't dig anything in the channel until the Bubba Dove and floodgate, the lock and floodgates constructed in place.
Right.
So they've started that project. They bid it out. I don't know exactly if they physically started it yet, but it's in the process, and they expecting it to take 3 years to complete.
Okay.
So we're looking at 3 to 4 years before we can start dredging. Okay?
Before we can even start doing the
But there's a
deepening.
lot of stuff we have to do prior to that,
Okay.
and that's what we're going to get into a little bit today.
Okay.
So we're working with GIS Engineering, local engineering firm, excuse me. And what they're doing is they're investigating the 34 or so utilities that cross the channel. Okay.
Wow.
Everyone has to be located, and the
Okay.
depth has to be checked. Okay, and then a determination as to whether it needs to be abandoned or lowered. Okay, or left alone. Okay, so. And the Corps, you have to work with the Corps on that, and,
Right.
and they recently changed the federal depth requirement for cover over pipelines. It was 8 feet, and now it's 15 feet. Okay, but
Holy
then
cow, they almost doubled
there's a lot of little side deals. Well, when was it installed? What date was it installed? And so there's a lot of things you got to look at. So what they do is they go and they locate the utility. They
Okay.
probe it, find out what the depth is, and then they go sit down with the Corps and say, okay, we got a sewer line, okay, we got a gas line, okay, we got a water line, okay, we got electricity line, everything that crosses the channel, and they determine how much cover they need to do, and so that determines whether or not they need to relocate it. Okay?
Wow.
So
abandon it, relocate
that's
it,
right.
move
and
it.
And then the state and the parish and the port are considered the local sponsor for the project.
Okay.
The federal government is the federal sponsor.
Right.
The federal government does a cost share, and it's 80-20. So the state, parish, and port have to come up with 20%, and the feds are going to pay
80%.
But that doesn't count the utility relocations. That's an in-kind service that we have to do.
Wow.
And we have to pay for. Okay.
Wow.
So the state has been stockpiling money in capital outlay specifically for this over the past years, and we have started already, and we are locating pipelines, meeting with all companies. The phase one is going to be from mile 12 to mile 0. Okay, that's the
12-mile
lower
stretch.
section of it. That's the
Right.
first phase, and that's the phase that they're looking at right now. So they also have to do right-of-ways for the spoil disposal of the material
Okay.
And that's going to be further up the channel. In the bay, they don't have to do that.
Okay.
And they also have to look at oyster leases, if there's any in the area, and they have to address oyster leases as well. So,
Okay. So there's so many different moving parts
Yeah.
to it, you
So-
know, and y'all are trying to get all those lines, if they got to be moved, y'all trying to do it within that 3-year window,
That's
right?
correct. That's correct.
But you got all these other things to contend with as well.
So it's tedious, and it's a necessary part of the project. The utility locations can be costly depending on the language in the right-of-way agreements. So they got to research the right-of-way agreements and then go from there, find it, determine the cover.
decide what to do with it.
And then the right-of-way is going to say who's responsible for lowering it if it needs to be lowered,
Okay.
And so there's a little bit of legalities in that. But anyway, we're going to look at all of that and decide and start the work. They GIS has, like I said, task order number 1 is from mile 12 to really minus 3.7, which it goes out into the Gulf.
Right.
Risk evaluation and mitigation review is ongoing to answer question what needs to be lowered, relocated, or removed entirely. Okay.
And then who's responsible to pay for
And
it?
then who's responsible, okay? And they're also doing research on property lines, oyster leases within the mile 12 to mile 3.7, as well as creating maps depicting property lines, pipeline alignments, oyster leases, and spoil disposal areas. They're currently waiting on the latest active oyster lease data from the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries Office so that they can it can be used in their map, okay? All the oyster leases. So they met with a few pipeline companies already, and they have 14 pipelines that either need lowering or abandonment. The old requirement was 4 feet. I thought it was 8. It's 4 feet of cover below the mud line. Today the requirement amount it varies depending on if it's a new line or old line or depending on what's in the line. Okay,
Sure.
But it could be the regulation could be up to 15 feet of cover. So.
Wow.
But they bore those lines anyway. They directionally drill them. So they can, if you want them to be 15 feet, they can easily go 30 feet and not even cost them that much extra because they already boring it.
Okay.
So that's how they do most of them.
Okay. So now, with all that said, what is it that happens up in Washington, D.C. and the politics that actually affect what's happening with the port in our region?
That's a good question. Government funding is at the top of the list. That we talked about that earlier.
Right.
With a new date for the continuing resolution for March 11th funding deadline for the appropriations to avoid a government shutdown. Okay.
Right.
And this ties into the agency maintenance because that's where we get our money for the agency maintenance.
Right.
It's fiscal year 22 should have been approved in October of 21.
And it wasn't.
And it wasn't, okay? And then going forward, you got a Supreme Court opening, okay? So Biden was supposed to, or is supposed to appoint or nominate somebody in February, okay? And then March could be consumed by that. You know how long it took the other one. It could be consumed, so they're not gonna get much done in that month, okay?
Right.
And then we got the Ukrainian-Russian war that just started last night or this morning or whenever, and so that's going to be a big player in everybody's economy. It's just going to, gas prices, all kinds of stuff, So, and then you go back to all these the stimulus bill that they passed. The Congress passed a $1 trillion infrastructure bill. It was called the Investments in Jobs Act last year. It invests $17 billion in ports. And infrastructure and waterways, plus $25 billion for airports. That's, nationwide.
Right.
So we have to get into there and see if we can get some of that money.
Some of those funds.
And it will address the funds will address the repair and maintenance backlogs, which is a lot of backlogs throughout the nation on channels and dredging. Reduce congestion and emissions with electrification and other low-carbon technologies, okay? So you have to keep an eye on that because that could be very, very costly and really not produce anything, okay? I mean, we could go back to caveman and living like cavemen in the United States, okay? And it wouldn't make a dent in the global warming or the hydrocarbon whatever. It just won't make a dent.
Right.
And that's been studied and been proven. So you could spend billions and not get anywhere, but that's what some people want. Now I believe in green energy.
Right.
I think that's something that we're going to eventually get to, but we can't do it overnight.
No, it's got to be a process.
It never will happen overnight. Now you got a lot of left-wing people that are saying, no, we're going to in the oil field. Well, they're just saying that they won't be able to. It won't happen that way, you know.
Right.
So, you know, it's something to keep an eye on, though, because it's going to cost us a lot of money with all of this electrification and zero hydrocarbon emissions.
Right.
You know?
And so in the last couple of minutes, David, I know we talked a little bit about what's happening nationally. Let's talk about what's happening at the state level.
All right. Well, from now until the session starts, which is what, March 14th, or March 21st. No, I'm sorry, March 14th. The session starts. That's hard to say.
Right.
They're going to be pretty much introducing bills and working on the capital outlay bill. Okay, the revenue bill, and that's going to consume the state from now until the session starts, and then. On March 21st, the governor's scheduled to submit the capital outlay bill to the legislature. So what happens is everybody submits their requests, okay?
Right.
Their requests are usually a couple billion, and I'm just being, you know, and the amount of money to do the request is about $1 billion. So the governor takes it the first right out of the box, and he manipulates the bill to make sure we have the money to pay for it, okay?
Right.
Then he introduces it to the legislature, and then they go back and forth, the House and Senate, and they add and delete until the end of the session, and it's always right at the end, you know, they approve it, you know, and that's June 6th when the session ends. So,
okay.
But it travels through the legislature the whole time, and it's pretty interesting to see how it works. But you know, it's a complicated process that you have to go through to get money.
Right.
So,
and now this last minute, let's talk a little bit about what kind of monies we got in installments.
Okay, so we got so we received $101 million in the first installment of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Now that money is going to be used to improve drinking water systems around the state.
Right.
So they're going to be replacing lead pipes, removing contaminants, ensure that rural and undeserved communities have clean water. Believe it or not, about 1 in 5 of the 1,300 municipalities' parish water system in Louisiana don't meet Louisiana Department of Health and Environmental Quality standards, okay? And so the state has $4 billion in needs just for that.
Wow.
Okay, so.
And look, that's a great update for what's happening nationally and certainly what's happening on a state level. But David, thank you for being involved and knowing those things. We appreciate you coming to share.
Thank you for having me.
All right, guys, and that'll do it for Going Public. Don't go anywhere. A lot more local programming here on HTV.